You're listening to the PR Wind Down podcast, the show for public relations professionals who are ready to see real change in the PR industry. We are your hosts, April White and Laura Schooler. Let's get ready to wind down. Okay, so let's kick things off. Laura, welcome to PR Wind Down along with everyone else.
Thanks.
Are you ready to wind down?
I already ate my bowl of blueberries, so I got nothing left to do but wind down.
Drink out of your weird straw with the mustache on it. Also, why are you wearing the key to my heart?
I had been wearing the same pair of necklaces all summer, and I just started switching it up again recently. My friend gave me this for one of my significant birthdays years ago.
30?
I'm not 30 yet, so no.
Oh, okay.
25.
See. Wait, so is it a functional key or just a completely fake key?
It's a fake key, but it's pretty cool, right?
It is cool.
Yeah.
Looks like you're going to unlock my heart, but maybe it's not possible.
Is it? It's locked and somebody threw away the key?
Yeah. Only that person can find it. It looks like we already have Heather in the waiting room.
Okay.
Are you ready to rock and roll with Heather?
I am.
Okay. I'm going to let her in. Here she comes. Wait for it. Wait for it.
Hello.
Hey, Heather. How are you?
Hello.
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Good to see you again. All right. So our guest today is Heather Willett. She is the founder and CEO of Willet PR. And we are here today to discuss with her the impact of bias in media relations and client expectations surrounding those biases, and then also the importance of authenticity in PR today. So welcome, Heather. So happy to have you.
Thank you, April. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So this is partly something that I'm just normally passionate about, but I realized recently that there was an app I haven't been using where you could actually judge the bias of a media outlet based on objective, well, let's say objective. They're supposed to be objective metrics that show you if it's left leaning, right leaning, kind of in the middle. And it got me thinking, because also recently I'd had a conversation with our new marketing director about getting me some, different media placements and mainstream top tier things. And she's like, oh, well, if we get you in Fox, we got to make sure we balance it out over here. And I don't think it's a good idea for you to be in Newsmax because then it's going to look like we lean. So it's like very interesting to me because there is such a politicized media landscape now that it's something that you have to take into account when you're doing PR for your client. Okay, is this bias matching their bias? And or if we go over here, do we need to balance it out? If they're in Fox, do they also need to be on CNN to make sure that we're like somewhere in the middle? So anyway, I'm super curious if you run into that yourself with clients where, okay, we got to really be careful about where we place you, or if they really have a leaning that they want to lean into that you have to then accommodate.
Well, yeah, absolutely. When we bring on a client, those are some of the conversations that we have from the very beginning. How do you have a stance? Do you want to publicize that stance?
Mm-hmm.
I think a few things have happened in the last couple of years. I mean, obviously we've had unprecedented challenges over the last 2 years, and a few things that have come out of that, right? I mean, we are seeing people vocalize their political leanings more. And we've also seen this this younger generation, right? Gen Z and millennials coming into more buying power. As a result, their values are really showing up in the way that they're purchasing and in the brands that they are following, right? So you have these consumers who are very political, who have these values, and they want to engage with brands who share those same values. Well, as a result, brands have to think really hard about their messaging.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to be political? Do we want to lean this way or that way? Because everything that comes after whatever decision you make, whatever decision a brand makes, every decision after that has to fall in alignment with that decision.
Agreed.
So from the partners, the vendors, the outlets that they work with are all going to be a reflection of their values.
Mhm.
And so that's going to sway consumers one way or another, right? So
Right.
they really need to think about their audience, but I think consumers are really demanding that brands and businesses take a stand.
What kind of clients do you typically work with, consumer
We
facing?
actually work with both B2C and B2B clients.
Right.
And so that's why I say everything that a brand does after deciding how they're going to position themselves, what's their message, everything needs to be in alignment, because even if it's B2B, you still need to think about the brand partnerships that you're creating. What kind of companies are you working with? Even if it's B2B, right? Because businesses that maybe are consumer, if they're purchasing a software solution, right? A SaaS vendor to help with their consumer product or service, they need to think about whether or not that SaaS product, that company is in alignment with their values, because I guarantee you their consumer is going to dig into that and they're going to look, oh, well, you say that you stand for sustainability, but you purchase, a software solution from this company and they don't stand for climate change and, any of that. So I think that's why it's so important that everything a
Mhm.
brand does needs to be in alignment with their message.
My concern about letting brands get too polarizing is if they don't have, to your point, which I think we completely agree on, if they don't have a track record of that, right? You can't
Yeah.
just all of the sudden throw your hat in the ring and support an issue that's hot in, culture, the social media, the media, etc. If you don't have evidence or proof points that you've been doing that all along. I always cite Ben and Jerry's, who they've been left leaning for as long as anyone can remember and fighting for those social causes, back in the days of hippies or
Yep.
whatever, right? Like,
Yep.
like that's their brand. They built it on that. Same with Mike Lindell, right? He's the My Pillow guy that everybody knows is the right leaning,
Yep.
on the wings of that movement, right? And so it's like he's built it on that.
Mhm.
You're not going to change it at this point. Let him be it. But for brands that are not taking a stance, I actually advise them not to, because the main thing for me is that I don't think what the world needs now is more polarization. In addition to that, it's like, well, you never know when the tide is going to shift, or, if you take a stance on something and it spoke to people for 5 minutes or 5 months, and then suddenly, but it ostracized all of this other potential audience in doing it. That those are my main concerns are, ostracizing half of your target audience and, doubling down on the fractalization of America, which is not what any. I mean, I guess somebody could make the argument that we need that, but I wouldn't support it. So,
No, I actually think you and I are saying the same thing. So we don't actually advise our clients to go one way or another and be so political.
yep.
My point is really, if you are connecting with your consumers, your audiences, whoever they may be, right? And you have to understand their values
Mhm.
in order to connect with them.
Mhm.
And you have to do so in a very authentic way.
Mhm.
Take, for example, greenwashing, right? Companies who, especially when this whole sustainability wave came and everybody wanted to be eco-friendly and they put that on all their packaging, or they put that on their website, consumers started calling them out for greenwashing. Well, you're just
Mhm.
putting that out there, but you're not really putting
Doing
together
it.
programs and initiatives that follow through on those statements.
Yep.
So that's why I say figure out your messaging. If you want to be neutral, that's fine. There's no problem in that. But if you are trying to connect with an audience that does lean one way or the other, you need to make sure that your messaging reflects that, right?
100%. Yep. Yeah.
And
And if you're
it
Mike
needs to
Lindell,
be,
then
yeah,
God bless him. Go for it. Like, be on, like,
exactly,
Steve Bannon show and, like, know your audience and do
precisely.
it. Yeah.
Precisely. And then everything you do has to reflect that, because
Yep.
there needs to be that level of honesty in
Mhm.
those interactions and in that engagement with your audience.
Mhm.
Authenticity.
Yes.
It's a little bit of a precarious line to walk these days. Some companies, it's hard.
It's very hard. And I use
Yeah.
greenwashing as an example, but
Yeah, that's a good
y-
example.
you could look at any of these trending topics, right? Political topics,
Right.
equality, LGBTQ plus rights. If just putting up a rainbow flag on your
Right.
social page isn't enough.
Yep.
And consumers these days will call you out for it.
Yep. Agreed.
April and I worked on a client where all of a sudden the CEO wanted to get very like take political stand, which was not why he had hired us, at least. And so
And
he
it
thought he
wasn't
knew.
really related to the business model either.
No, no, it was a
Yeah.
little peripheral. But then he started going down. It was like his view on what, like, the economy should be and business should be like. So he was like, yeah, I do want to talk about this stuff. So he started going down that path. And I started doing the media training. I'm a journalist asking the hard questions.
Mm-hmm.
He got mad at me. And I was like, well, you're going to get asked these questions.
Yes.
Yeah, that relationship didn't last too much longer after that.
Well, I think he was mostly hoping to get media coverage by being sensational. But what wasn't clear to either of us, and I mean, I don't want to speak for Laura, but at least to me, was if he really believed it or if he
Right.
just wanted to be contrarian to get himself a name in the press. Because it
Right.
didn't read necessarily to me like there was a consistent nucleus of the viewpoint as much as that he just wanted to be adversarial.
And when I
somehow.
asked him a few tough questions, he didn't really know enough about what he was saying his point of view was. So that goes to what you've been saying this whole conversation.
I think
Yeah.
that reads as disingenuous, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
if you guys are able to pick up on that,
The
certainly their
press will
audience is
too.
going to be able to pick up on
Right.
that.
And then consumers too.
For
And
sure.
I was also, it was like, what kind of media coverage are we getting this guy anyway? It wasn't really even about his business at that point. And I was like, well, are you running for office? Because that's sort of what it sounds like. And I think we dodged a bullet.
I think so too. It also makes me wonder if we had gone for it, would that have pigeonholed us? So, for example, if you have a client that only wants alt-right media, they only want to be in, I'm trying to remember all the names, Newsmax, they only want to be on the Steve Bannon show. They only like if there's like, this
Yeah.
whole
Very right wing
right. If they only
outlet.
want to be
New York
there,
Post or something. Yeah.
if they only want to be in outlets like that, do you worry as a practitioner for your brand that will reflect badly on you if you're placing media placements in alt-right publications? Or do you feel like that just shows depth and breadth? I'm partly asking because I have this question for myself.
That's an interesting question. I think it goes back to, at least for myself, integrity. If I'm working with you and you're a client of Willet PR, it's because we believe in you in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you have differing political views from us as individuals, that's okay,
Mm-hmm.
as long as it's not, from my point of view, harming anyone. So I think that if I'm taking on a client and I'm working with them, I don't see an issue pitching them where they need to be pitched
Mm-hmm.
and reaching out to different media and working with different media from left or right, because I've already made the decision to work with that client. And now I have to do whatever's in their best interest, right? I have to put my best foot forward. Whole team has to work on their behalf to make sure that we're meeting the client's needs. So whatever that might look like,
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of how I approach it.
I think that's really fair. It's interesting because I think in general, it does just sort of speak to the overarching issue of authenticity and PR and the need for brands to be doing what they say they're doing, whether that's involved with any socio-political stance of any kind or not.
Exactly. Or
But
not. We're completely staying neutral as
Right.
Switzerland, right?
You
Yeah.
can't say you're national if you're not national. You can't say you're sustainable if you have LED light bulbs in your warehouse and that's it. You can't, you can't pretend that you're this cutting edge thing if you have 3 other competitors doing the same thing. I mean, you can
Exactly.
say those things, but the press won't respect you and won't cover that. So figure out how to make your story match your storytelling?
So I worked, in-house at a big, giant, huge company for a long time. And we would get some of the, senior executive spokespeople on business TV, and it was CNBC or Fox Business News or whatever the hell that's called now. And also sometimes like Wall Street Journal or Dow Jones had, like different video shows. It was basically online. It wasn't, like a TV station, but they would do these videos. And the world was not as polarized, and like Newsmax didn't exist, etc. I think at the time we thought of those three outlets as, video interviews as being fairly neutral in terms of this is just about business. I don't know if Fox Business News and CNBC and like some of the different Wall Street Journal or Dow Jones type, video shows are still perceived as relatively business neutral.
I don't think they are seen as business neutral for the most part anymore. Which isn't
that long ago. I'm talking about 2015 or whatever,
CNN put out this news recently how they're actually like evaluating whether the personalities and programming that got really polarizing can be sort of less partisan and trying to like, steer the ship back to neutral, which it honestly probably comes from a lack of ratings, because I think the fractionalization is probably not profitable for the press either.
I mean, to say that the media landscape has changed drastically in the last 10 years is an understatement.
Yeah.
I think it went from what we all know, which was a little bit more mainstream, it was centrist, to now you have left, you have right, and then you still have some mainstream, but it's changed so much. And the way that we interact with these outlets and these media contacts has changed. Especially after the last 2 years, we've seen so many of these journalists become freelancers and just go where they're
Substacks and
yeah, exactly. I think
it's all splintered off.
It has changed so much. I think Laura, you just hit an important point, that it's become so fractionalized and it can't be sustainable.
Yeah.
So either they're going to completely start to fall apart, or they're going to have to find their way back into sort of that mainstream way of thinking, that centrist way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
What are you thinking, Laura? You're very quiet on this.
Well, no, it's just like, what do you do?
What do you do? Yeah.
Right. If you're just trying to, get your client interviews to talk about their business.
And suddenly even that's political somehow.
It's interesting because it really has changed our careers, the way that we operate as PR and marketing practitioners, right? It's changed the way we have to operate half of our clients, because our communications have to be very genuine. We still have to make those meaningful connections with media, and we have to tell the story on behalf of our clients. But now we have to do that in more creative ways, because this political landscape, because it's so fractionalized, that we have to find a little bit of balance in there. So we're really tasked with having to do that. So our careers have changed.
I guess I not started, but early in my career, I was working for somebody who leaned left, but for a living. And so whatever media outlets that he was talking to, they were fairly
receptive,
neutral to probably left, and like at that time but he was speaking on the left side of the issue. Now it's like the media is so fractionalized. It no longer is it necessarily the content of the person, it's the content of the platform.
Yes. That gets me thinking. I'm wondering, April, you actually said something about, your former client coming up with all of these contrarian views just because he thought that maybe that would get the needle moving in the right direction, right? Yeah. I wonder if that has become a thing for more companies and brands than we realize.
Yeah.
I think it's well known in our industry that media really do like contrarian stories. They like
Mhm.
someone coming in and shaking things up a little bit. They like something controversial to a degree. And maybe some of these brands have been advised, or for whatever reason think it's a good idea to just go in there with a contrarian idea that they don't actually believe in.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think that social media has played a huge part in that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The
Which
way
would
you
make
get
sense because
followers and reactions is to say crazy, outrageous stuff, whether or not you really care, believe it, or know what you're talking about. But if you've got a platform and if you're somewhat known, it moves the needle. It's like, no press is bad press or no attention is bad attention. And I think that has driven a lot of the traditional media as well.
well, I mean, I think that's just it. It's a landmine right now,
It's a
and
everything is a landmine.
everything. I mean, it's not just politics, it's everything, and I think you just made a perfect point with that scenario.
Because then do we look like
'Cause
we're
you have to
leading the
think about
political direction when we pitch that there's a recession happening that people are trying to, like, put on the blinders and pretend is
yeah, I mean,
happening?
you have to think about all the moving pieces
Wow.
and figure out which way it's gonna fall, right? Which way that domino piece is gonna fall. So,
Yep.
that's exactly why it's so important to think about all of those moving
Yeah.
pieces, both as a PR marketing, professional, and as as well as these companies, right?
Yeah.
All of these companies, they need to think about it because
Right. You go this way a little bit and it could open up a
any
whole Pandora's
any
box.
comment
Yep.
will start that
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
And
So
then
Heather,
you will be labeled either this or that,
right.
regardless of what you actually believe or the company's stance on it. You get labeled as something, and it's
Yeah.
hard to come back from that.
Yeah. We should probably put a bow on this one, and it was been so fun. Obviously, Heather, I feel like we could just go on for another 3
Keep
hours, but we're
talking, I know.
not supposed to. So let's do that offline. But for now, do we have any kind of key takeaways that we want to leave people with that are the 10,000-foot view of this issue that's not necessarily political, but just in general, what do we want people to apply to their everyday PR jobs after this pontification that we've
Yeah. I think
gone
the
on?
the biggest things, pay attention to who your audience is and who you wanna target, and make sure that your message and then all of your policies, practices, initiatives, everything falls in line with that messaging,
Mm,
falls in line with your values that are represented in that messaging, because that's going to create that authentic and genuine connection with that audience. And you can build from there.
mhm.
Regardless of what your political view is or your stance on some of these hot topics, you can build a community when you're building from a place of authenticity.
Mhm. I love
So
that.
I think when you're looking at who is my audience and what's important to them,
Mhm.
and does that reflect who we are as a brand and how
Mhm.
we are showing up in the market
Mhm.
for our audience. I think those
Yep.
are the most important things.
Yeah, I agree.
And the right PR agency will think about all of that, and they'll make sure that that messaging is refined. They'll make sure that whoever they're reaching out to in terms of media is in alignment with that,
Mhm.
so that those stories can be told.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would add to that, I think that the more that agencies in general and practitioners can try to stay balanced, or even if they're not personally balanced, have team members that maybe have a slightly different perspective, the more you can avoid those pitfalls. And if you personally can, I mean, a lot of people can't stomach listening to both sides, but if you can, I highly recommend it because I think that it makes you a lot more, you don't have the blinders on that might
Mhm.
lead you to make some really big mistake for your client.
It makes you
Mhm.
really effective.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Well, any final thoughts for us, or and then in addition to that, how can people reach you, Heather?
Yeah, no other thoughts. People can reach me at Heather at willetpr.com, or they can go to our website, willetpr.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It was nice chatting with you guys.
Yeah, you
You
too.
too.
Talk soon, Heather.
Okay,
Okay.
sounds good. Bye.
Bye. All right, so Laura, let's hear the horror story of the day.
Okay. Today's horror story comes to us from we don't know who because they're anonymous. So here goes. Hi, ladies. I won't make any jokes there, but anyway. So I started a new PR agency job at a small firm starting out. I don't know what that means. Maybe we'll get more background.
Okay.
I'm a recent
Probably
grad.
like a new firm.
I guess so.
Okay.
I'm a recent grad, so I was really happy to have landed in an agency spot, and it just so happened that someone from my graduating class has been working at the same firm. I know this because I'm a LinkedIn creep.
Okay.
You're not a creep. When I finally connected one-on-one with my new boss, I mentioned the mutual connection. And my boss told me my classmate, Dan we'll call him, had been freelancing at the firm but ghosted recently. It's remote work, so I guess one day he just stopped showing up. The pay wasn't great, and I didn't know this guy super well, so I just figured he had moved on to something else. Anyway, I started out this new job and I decided to reach out to Dan to ask how he was and if he had any tips for me in my new role since he'd worked there recently. He told me he didn't have any advice and it was a cold interaction at first, but then it heated up. Dan started flipping out, that was all caps, on me,
Oh my
sending
God.
me multiple paragraph texts about how disgusting it was that my new boss would fire him this way. I was shocked. Apparently, I was Dan's replacement, and he hadn't formally quit. He also said he was going to call my new boss to give her a piece of his mind. I'm kind of disturbed at this guy's rage, but what do I do now? Do I tell my boss about this or do I just wait for her to bring it up if Dan goes nuclear on her? Help! PR is already scary and I just got here.
Oh my God.
Dazed and confused.
It's
The
kind
thing
of
that's
it's kind of a weird scenario, no?
it's the thing that's confusing to me is that the boss like said that Dan just ghosted when he hadn't. So the boss is lying?
Yeah, the boss is lying. Or
And
or he got fired because he disappeared, which we have actually had happen. We've had freelancers just stop being responsive, not respond to emails, Slack messages, text messages, phone calls, voicemails. It's not like we just let them disappear, but like
right.
legit disappear. And then it's like, well, guess we can't use them anymore.
So I guess the question here is I'm not sure is Dan lying basically or is the new boss lying? Regardless,
Maybe
it
both.
stinks. It stinks to be anybody, but especially a new person who's like just like trying to do the right thing to be put in the middle of this like divorce, like the kid in a divorce or something.
Yeah,
Well,
it's pretty
since
rough.
you're the person who is hired to work at this company and they're going to be paying you, I think your concern is for this job. And so you have to have an additional discussion with your boss to say, I don't understand. Did he ghost or was he fired? Because he's now calling me, telling me that basically my calling him and saying, hey, how was that gig? Was in his mind akin to him being told that he was fired.
Mm,
I'm also there's
okay.
a lot of jobs out there for junior people. You might want to keep looking for another gig because that's a bad way to start out a job.
It's really awkward. I don't know. In general, I'm a fan of giving people the benefit of the doubt and keeping your eyes open. So maybe it's worth seeing whether there are any other red flags that happen working for the new firm. and, just kind of tuck that one away for future reference as a potential, dot to connect, but
Right.
maybe for
Where
the
there's
time,
smoke, there's fire. I don't
maybe,
know.
but you never know. And sometimes, I mean, I think anytime there's that much conflict, there's probably a bit of truth in both
Right.
because things are complicated. And it's, it's like a breakup. Whenever you see couples that break up, if you only talk to one half of the couple, the perspective you'll hear is not going to match the
Right.
other person's, which doesn't make either a liar. It just means they had a different point
Well,
of
right. They had
view,
different expectations, or they wanted something
and they have
different out of
different
it.
narratives, and they
Yeah.
have different, well, they connect dots that the other person doesn't connect. And maybe for this person, it ended because 3 years ago this thing happened and then it happened again. Maybe for the other person, they just couldn't take it anymore. I mean, you never it's like they're
Right.
just completely different points of view on
But this
why.
person's question
Yeah.
is, do I tell my boss about this, or do I just wait for her to bring it up if Dan goes nuclear on her? I think you have to bring it up.
I would stay out of it.
Ha! Stay out of it. Apparently, this girl, I think I'm assuming girl, I don't know why, is this guy's replacement. You're already in the middle of it.
Well, yeah. Yeah, if you can't stay out of it, like in this particular situation, then you're probably right. You have to say, "Hey, listen, I didn't mean to step in it here, and I would prefer to stay out of it. However, I want to let you know this is all I know. I'd like to slowly back away from here and be in the middle of this, but I want to let you know that I put my foot in my mouth in this way or whatever. And you don't owe me an explanation. I'm still happy to work here, but I do want to just give you the heads up that this happened." What do you think of something like that?
Yeah, it's just interesting that the boss thinks or says that Dan ghosted, and Dan is like, "What? Huh? Like, is this how I'm getting fired?" Everybody's full of.
Everybody
Yeah,
has their own perspective.
yeah. I guess what you're saying. I mean, there's really no other way. All right.
No, I think it's just,
Dilemma, dilemma.
yeah, the world we live in. It's complicated. I hope that was useful to whoever wrote in.
So,
Yes. So, news of the week that you found, Laura, is a
yeah.
story in the New York Times about this Lower Manhattan's most infamous publicist, Kaitlin Phillips, who doesn't always stay behind the scenes and sort of inserts herself into the news and PR, as evident by the story.
Right, right. She's definitely not behind the scenes, but she's got a New York Times huge article all about her, right?
Huge article all about her. Yeah. So she's sort of doing, like, kind of creating news by doing outrageous things, right?
I I got the more of the sense that she's like in the mix with the coolest, downtown New York scenesters that I am so not cool enough to even know who they are, right? This is
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
maybe if this was the 90s, I would have an inkling of who those people were, but I don't know anything anymore. I don't live downtown. I'm too old, whatever. I don't know. So,
Right. So, for example, they list in the article musician Dev Hines, assuming I'm pronouncing that correctly because I'm out of it too. David Velasco, the editor in chief of Art Forum, the cult comic Lauren Servideo, artist Sarah Morris, the doorman from the club Paul's Casablanca. So, anyway, yes, there's like a bunch of people that I don't
it's just like
know
the taste makes
exactly.
the
The
taste
tastemakers.
makers of America.
Yeah.
And most people don't know who they are and will never know who they are, or maybe, whatever. But these are the people who are pulling the levers on what is like, cool. And then it eventually spills out in different formats. It gets picked up by corporate America. And then it, like, in, 5 years, everybody will be doing it. But it started,
Yeah.
in the city. So, of New York. So I'm sure this happens in LA too, but it's a different
Oh
scene
yeah.
here.
Yes.
Um, so I saw the story on a Facebook group that I'm part of, and there's a lot of PR people saying I couldn't read past the a third of the article. I don't even know why this was written. She's a nightmare, like all this. It's so cringe. That was one of the things. I'll never get back the 5 minutes it took me to read this drivel. I'm quoting. What a mess. I wonder what she'll be when she grows up. She has a limited shelf life on this plan. She'll probably be broke and an alcoholic by the time she's 40. I mean,
People are
people went
so
to
nasty.
town.
This is vicious, this feedback.
These are the type of people who give public relations a bad name in the fictional Samantha Jones on Sex of the City. Now, apparently she went out with, I don't know, some older guy who's like paying her rent or was paying her rent. She's in with, so she is like the Anna Sorkin of the PR world. It also reminded me of 20 years later, and in a different way, Lizzie Grubman, who apparently is still moving and shaking.
You looked her up after this
I
to see if
did,
she's
and
still
she had
alive and kicking?
665,000 followers on
Oh my
Instagram. I
god.
was like, wow. It's not exactly the same, even for the time, even if you adjust for inflation. It's not exactly the same,
Oh my
but it's
god.
still that same, like the Samantha Jones thing comes up in your head where it's like this woman who's like moving and shaking and going to this club and that art show and meeting this person and
Yeah, yeah,
knows all the
yeah.
right people. Now Lizzie Grobman was not so low key. She was more of like the too tan and going to the Hamptons. Where I have a feeling this woman is she's from Montana. Is that what it said? And from this picture, you see her photo in the article. She's very low key and not like made up, not fancy. But everything she probably wears is probably a $490 t-shirt kind of person, but you wouldn't know unless you knew.
Just so fascinating. She's this strawberry blonde girl from Montana who's 32 and just doesn't
Right.
she looks a bit mousy, to your
Right.
point.
And they even say that she's got like her mousy glasses on. But again, I'm reading more comments. She's unbearable. I'm too dumb to care about this story and her.
I
All
mean,
above and then some.
and she started as a writer, it looks like. So it was which
Yes.
was sort of exaggerated in that she was this party critic for Art Forum and was basically, writing on Twitter and things like that. So she's sort of self-aggrandizing and sort of overly promoted herself to the point of faking it till she made it in a number of different milestones, I think, right? Till she got to this point. And I think it's interesting what you bring up about this is definitely more the LA style of PR than New York. So she's really a bit out of her normal,
Why do
the
you say
real.
it's more LA style than New York?
It's funny when I moved to LA and I started interviewing for jobs, what they wanted me to do was not strategic media relations as much as it was hobnobbing. I was interviewing at Red Bull and for, doing music style PR. And they just wanted me to be out at the clubs every single night, meeting people and figuring out, who they could
Get
use.
something from?
Yeah. And I was like, that what? Like, that doesn't match my training at Columbia. That doesn't match any of my experience. Like, is people really doing that? Like, it was like, what's happening? Like, I don't want to do that kind of PR. That's not my jam.
Interesting.
And so it was a weird, kind of, and then I had another thing happen. And it could have been that I was, coming from eMusic and interviewing for music related jobs, but even at Beats by Dre, it was the other one I was interviewing at. And it was a similar, well, who do you know? What would you do with celebrities? And it was like, what are the brand goals? Who's the target audience? And it was like we were speaking completely different languages.
It's publicity for publicity's sake kind of stuff.
Oh, and I was just like, I don't even know. You're not giving me anything strategic from which to advise on. And you just want me to rock in here and have some grandiose thoughts on, I can't bullshit you like that. I need to know what you are working towards. What's the goal? But it was like, Dre, like oh my God, what? Like, I don't. So it's funny that in New York of all places too, that she's doing this. I love this quote that's in the article from the former New York Times media columnist. And he says, I think she's one of those New York characters like Ariana Huffington or Al Sharpton or Donald Trump, who just realizes the rules that everyone else is playing by are kind of made up.
I saw that. And she talks about how she was not intending on being a publicist or a PR person,
Hmm.
but here she is. She describes her professional sweet spot as very niche famous people, by which she means people who are interesting to her and to the other people she finds interesting. People who aren't necessarily known outside of downtown, but are instrumental to that scene, is how she describes it.
Yeah.
Her clients almost uniformly describe never even considering a publicist other than her. Yeah, they're not going to like PR firms and trying to get.
Hmm.
She represents her particularly cool friends for free, or not exactly free, because what she gets in exchange is stuff like paintings and furniture, meals out. But more commonly, what she gains is the credibility that comes from an association with the galleries and artists and novelists that she
Yeah.
decided are hers. Among them, and then you had mentioned some of them. So I want to know, are these people cool already, or does she just say, oh, I like you and I'm going to make you cool?
It seems like a bit of both.
Yeah.
Seems like she's tunneling in both directions.
So I have a question for you. Do you think some of these PR people who are, bashing this article in her are jealous?
100%.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. I'm not jealous because I want nothing to do with that kind of PR. And this kind of PR is exactly why I formed Trust Relations, to focus on authentic storytelling that's coming from a place of reality, and also why I don't touch celebrity clients and I don't touch politics, because it's a fabrication of reality. And so much of PR has been fabricating reality. Even the Women's March, like, with the cigarettes, like starting all the way back at the beginning of the infancy of PR, right? A lot of it's just staging reality. And while that still obviously has a place, or she wouldn't be thriving, I don't think it has a place for very long. I feel like where the world is going with people being able to see through this kind of stuff, it's
Right.
got a short shelf life. So yes, you can pretend that you're doing things. You can throw these things out there and see if they stick, but if they don't have authenticity behind them, then they're not going to land and stay there. So, I mean, maybe some of these artists that she's throwing out there will stick because they're actually brilliant artists. And she's made a name for somebody who's delivering something truly innovative. But it feels to me like she is trying to go back to the Bob Dylan days of when culture was really sculpted by these artists who were really pushing the envelope. I feel like she wants to be living in that New York
Well,
where like
right.
Patti Smith and Robert Mapplethorpe were like really changing the way everything was done, and would show up with these crazy outfits and these
Right.
crazy concepts and this crazy art that was
So
like,
it's funny you say it, because there's somebody on the group who says,
oh, interesting.
he says, I gotta say, I love her. I love the article. Doesn't it make New York sound just so alive? So 1980s? So
It does.
Andy Warhol would be her friend?
Yeah.
I don't know her, never heard of her. Maybe won't like her if we ever met, but she's doing something right for now.
Interesting.
I'm not jealous of her, but I'm like, God, how do people like her do what they do? I wish that I could, and then I wish that I could choose to or not.
I almost feel like what happened, and this is, I have no idea, but this is just in my head, this is what happened. In my head, little girl from Montana grew up reading about New York City, watching documentaries, reading the autobiography that Patti Smith wrote about remembering her time of moving to the city, and it feels like she romanticized the New York that used to be, and almost is imposing her will and fantasy onto current New York, and just making it so, almost, right? Finding other people who also want to revive
Right. But
when New York was edgy.
How does somebody do that? Like, if I
their,
walked in,
it's their gravity. It's the same as Donald Trump or
Right.
the people mentioned here, right? You walk in and your center of gravity and your perspective is so charismatic and so consistent and coherent and so passionate that everyone just comes
Believes
and
you? Right.
believes you because you know people like this. Cult leaders are like this. The guy from WeWork is like this. The people from Lula Rose. So this is not new. It's just that certain people, whether they're delusional or not, and I think many would argue that they are, but are they if they can bend reality to their
Right.
perspective? And so I feel like she's one of those people that just comes in like a freight train
Hmm.
and you can't help but be drawn into her.
Like Anna Sorkin or
Yeah.
whatever her name was.
Yep.
Yeah. I,
And those people, if they're big enough actors and they have the wherewithal, can sometimes pull it off. But it can't be hollow. So the only way people like this are stopped is when they don't deliver on the promise
right.
of their vision.
Right. When the gas runs out of the car
Yeah.
kind of thing.
But if the vision is
Right.
delivered, I mean, same thing with WeWork, right? Like that guy
Mhm.
didn't
Mhm. And
deliver,
I
but if
think
he
he's coming
had,
back with some other.
he is. Yeah, he got financing for it miraculously. So I mean,
Right.
it's so maybe he had a bad run as an entrepreneur, and this time it'll be better. But those people, man, they just have
Right.
that X factor.
Right. So I'm not bashing her because like I said, I wish that I had that in me and then I could decide how I wanted to use it.
That's so funny.
I've dabbled on the edges of it. My fatal flaw is I too much identify with other people's feelings. I feel other
You're
people's
too
feelings.
empathetic. Yeah, yeah. I don't
Yeah.
think you can be an empath and do that.
Right. You might have to be a narcissist to be
I
able to
think you
do it.
have in that direction or character disorder, I
Yeah.
mean, I think you have to have a little bit of you don't give a shit what anyone else feels or thinks to be able
Yeah,
to pull
I
it
do
off.
way too much for my own good. So yeah. But I'm drawn to the idea of that, creating your reality out of almost nothing, right?
Well, no, and what's cool about it is that is the essence of PR. That's the
Yeah,
very you create something before it exists and that's what artists do. That's what
yeah,
musicians hear music in their head and there is something
right.
admirable and very
Mhm.
miraculous about
So
it. I
she's
mean, when
like a
people
PR artist.
yeah,
Some people might say bull S artist.
I mean, we'll see. The proof is in the results, right? If somebody is the next Mozart and they hear stuff in their head and they put it on paper, who can say that they're not? People have to match their vision and their action, right?
Yeah,
And that's what we were literally talking about earlier as well with Heather. You can have a really big vision, and if you can't deliver on it with your action, it's not going to go very far. But
yeah,
the people that really make the biggest impact on the world are the ones with the really big vision and the dedication to the action to bring it into being and make it so. And then it's like
right.
I think there's a part of all of us that are jealous because well, why didn't
Hmm.
we manifest the thing that was in our head?
I think it probably actually works for what she's doing for whom she's doing it.
Mm,
I just wonder, where does she go from here? Does she just keep doing this kind of thing for the next, 30 years? Or does she
no, there's not a
into
future in
something
it.
else? Does she, yeah, write books? Does she open up her own restaurant? Like what does she do? Where does she go with this?
She makes a WeWork
Right.
or a LuLaRoe.
Does she work for Elon Musk? I mean, I don't know. Like where do you take she obviously has some pretty
She's
special
got a power of
skill.
persuasion. That's
Yeah.
right. So yeah, she could end up in the news. She could end up as a talking head. She could end up as like a famous podcaster. I mean, her future
She
is
should become
bright.
an
It's just
actress or something. I don't know. Yeah.
she's got some future, but whether
Yeah, I'm not mad at her
whether
though.
this version of PR does, I'm not sure. This is a very interesting look at somebody that is trying very hard to keep traditional PR alive, meaning the inventing of realities that are sort of questionable whether it's true and not coming from the place of authenticity like we were discussing with Heather earlier.
Mhm.
And she's sort of showing the polar opposite. Okay, this is and I think maybe that's why PR people find it so disgusting because they don't want to be doing PR anymore. And that's why, I would
Right.
insert do trust relations because that's the way to get away from this, you know, throwing weird parties to fabricate realities with people that are tastemakers maybe, but positioning them as Patty Smith, right? So,
Right.
you know, God bless her for giving it a try, but I think that it does further underscore the need to get away from the traditional PR route
Yeah. All
in
right.
some. Yeah. So with that, Laura, do you want to like shed a little tear and say goodbye to the audience?
Yes.
So thank you everyone for tuning in for the PR Wind Down podcast.
And thank you to Heather for joining us to talk about politics and PR today.
So interesting. Remember to submit your own agency stories and questions and share our show with your friends and colleagues. It will help us reach new people and new listeners like you.
And if you have an anonymous PR horror story of your own, please send it to us at the contact email, which is below the episode notes.
We can't wait to wind down with you again next time.